Hi there guys, it's Jack and welcome to your Theory for Guitar module. And I'm really excited to get going with this module because as a teacher that has been working with guitar players for decades, I have noticed that one of the main things that holds people back from making progress and growing as a player, as a musician, branching out into different types of playing and different styles of music is they often lack the fundamentals of music theory, okay? And there's reasons why that's the case. There's some sort of kind of guitar culture reasons why. And I just want to address a few things right up front about why you might want to know theory, and two, what theory actually is and what it isn't, okay? So to start off with, a lot of people have a misconception about music theory. They hear the word music theory and they picture, oh, that's like for classical players, and I don't want to be a classical player, so I don't need music theory. Right? That's kind of one common misconception. But the truth is that actually classical players, they really need less music theory than rock and jazz and blues guys. Okay? And that may seem contrary to what your intuition would tell you. But if you think about it, you don't really need a lot of music theory to play a piece of classical music. You just need to be good at reading music. Okay, and reading music and understanding music theory, there's some overlap, but they're not the same thing by a long shot. Okay, so I went to music school myself and played classical guitar and everything, and I know for a fact a lot of classical guitar players, if I ask them, hey, what's in an A7 chord, they might have to scratch their head and think about it for a little while. Right? Whereas if I ask B.B. King, hey, what's in an A7 chord? You go, oh, A, C sharp, E, G. He wouldn't even have to think twice, right? So that's one common misconception we kind of want to dispel right off the bat. Theory and reading, those are distinct activities. It's not the same thing, okay? So what is music theory as it relates to the guitar, right? Well, music theory, relates to, music in general, but really for guitar, I'm kind of thinking like, hey, you just want to know, your basic major and minor scales and the chords that relate to those scales. Okay, that's one very, very excellent goal that all guitar players should have. And then from there, you'll kind of know what notes are in chords, and you'll learn how to look at a chord chart and understand how it relates to different keys, right? And then that's kind of a lot of what this module is about, just kind of getting some basics of the musical language down. After that, you kind of want to learn how blues and rock kind of changed things and have, shifted traditional music a little bit, and how those styles kind of intersect with each other, like more traditional old-fashioned European music with blues and rock and jazz, and how they overlap and how they influence each other. And it's kind of hard to jump in with the blues stuff though if you don't know the more traditional stuff for like major and minor scales and keys and chords, because blues music kind of took that stuff and tweaked it. So it's hard to understand the tweak if you don't understand the basics, okay? So music theory is just understanding the language of music and how music is constructed. And I have a couple modules coming up that are going to be, you'll see like how useful it really, really is. So I have a module coming up where we work on learning chord inversions all over the neck, which is really crucial for writing parts. If you're like in a band or you want to do like a little solo arrangement for yourself, being able to play a G chord in 5 different ways all over the neck, super, super useful. But that kind of playing gets very, very difficult unless you can just right off in your head say, oh, this is a 3 shape, a 5 shape, a 1 shape. The 1, 3, 5 of G is GBD. The G is here, the B is here, the D is here, So that's kind of theory applied, and you'll be able to write parts after you go through that module by learning chord inversions. And if you don't have your basic language of music, everything is just done by memory, and you don't see the context and you don't put things together. But when you have the language of music under your belt, you can see how everything fits together, scales and chords and chord inversions and improv and written melodies, everything comes together, right? And another module that I have coming up is it's called the Soloist Game Plan. And it's all about looking at tunes and not having to, just kind of struggle through using your ear and trying this, trying that, until you stumble across something that you think kind of works. But before you even pick up your guitar, you'll be able to look at a chord chart and go, oh, I can see what they're doing here. This part's in this key, this part goes a little bluesy, this part's got this world beat kind of flair, and I can use this exotic scale, So you'll have this kind of knowledge about how music works, so that you have ideas of how to approach your playing before you even pick up your instrument, which saves a ton of time and is definitely what, when you're talking about like pro level guitar players, studio guitar players, that's what they usually do. Okay, they kind of have that knowledge under their belt. Which brings me to our next misconception about music theory. So I've already kind of dealt with the fact that music theory and reading aren't the same thing, right? But then there's this other argument against learning theory that a lot of guitar players kind of stubbornly voice, which is, well, this famous guitar player didn't learn theory, or this famous guitar player doesn't know theory. John Lennon didn't learn theory and he wrote all those great songs, or B.B. King doesn't know theory and he does all this great stuff, or Stevie Ray Vaughan or whoever, or Jimi Hendrix. And number one, you might be surprised at what they actually did know. Because again, reading and theory aren't the same thing. Theory is, knowing how chords and scales relate to each other, knowing what notes are in chords, knowing what notes are in scales. Pretty sure if you ask B.B. King, like I was saying earlier about like any particular chord or this or that, he's going to know what notes are in it, right? He's going to be able to play a blues solo, and then if he wants to pull out the major 6 out of a minor pent scale, he can do that. That's language that he's familiar with. So one, a lot of those guys do know more theory than you think. And two, sometimes you think about guys that, maybe some person didn't know a lot of music theory, but yet they still did all this great stuff. But you're usually talking about a famous musician that became famous probably pretty young. So you're talking about someone that has innate talent of, 1 in 1,000, 1 in a million level, because, hey, they're famous musicians for a reason, right? And then two, a lot of times those guys, they really put a lot of time in their instrument. You're talking, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a day when you're talking about like Stevie Ray Vaughan or Jimi Hendrix, or even the John Lennon for songwriting. He would sit down and play that much, all day, every day. So, they might stumble across things with their superior ear and with the fact that they're playing all day, and maybe they didn't quite understand it, right? But are you in that position? Do you have that same level of talent? Are you putting in the 10 hours a day that they're doing, right? And chances are the answer to both those questions is probably not. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's just probably the reality, right? So, if what makes a great guitar player and a musician is talent, hard work, and then I'd argue knowing what you're doing. Because knowing what you're doing opens up different avenues for you, saves you time, okay? And also, if you know what you're doing, you can explore certain things that you might not have thought of exploring by just using your ear, and then as a result, your ear actually gets better, right? So learning music theory doesn't replace having a good ear. It works with having a good ear, and in fact, it can improve your ear, okay? So that's that other argument I like to think that we could kind of dispel, that, these guys didn't know theory, so I don't, right? Well, there's a lot of circumstances that go into what make a great guitar player, and knowing what you're doing is one of them, right? And I can't, teach having more talent. I can't teach playing more hours a day, but I can teach knowing what you're doing, which, believe me, will make learning new techniques easier. It will be satisfying because you kind of finally understand how music works. Things seem like less like a mystery. And it's just going to be overall good for you as a musician. Okay, so that's my long-winded introduction, but I just felt like I kind of needed to address that because, like I said, there's a lot of common misconceptions, especially amongst guitar players. And, bottom line, like, theory is your friend. It's going to help you to get better. It's going to help you move in different directions, and it's going to give you a better ear when you work through ideas that you learn from music theory. Okay?